Why does Brad Fisher need to meet Chris Grimes? This is Matt Zeigler. You're watching Cultish Creative YouTube, officially a Panoptica.ai joint. Man, what did we get into? Aside from me butchering the intro, I had some old notes. I've known Brad a long time. I had some old stuff. I had this old story in my... You'll see. I like to take it down a peg first by showing what a disaster I can be in some of these things, and then make it a safe space for them. Because we talked about through lines, when you start pulling stories out of people, or you see all this stuff, how you connect them together. We talked about story structures. So we collect all those dots. How do they form constellations? And we talked about story curation, how to actually piece them together, know when you're the one in the driver's seat, or let the other person have the freedom and ability to connect those stories. These two, I know they are going to be friends after this, which is maybe my favorite part about it. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
And I use those words, please tell me your story. And the reason I think that is so powerful is that people are afraid in conversations when they're meeting a stranger or they're in a high stakes environment. They're afraid. They want to keep control. They feel a sense that they want to protect themselves. They want to put their armor on, even though you're trying to listen, you're asking questions. But when you ask somebody to tell you their story, they get to retain control. They get to relax, and people love to talk. We all do. They'll open up and they'll tell you everything you need to know to help them.
My podcast is called The Good Listening To Show. So called because my opinion about coaching, facilitating life. Now, you get the best out of relationships by giving somebody a damn good listening to. And so my passion for storytelling is to use the techniques of deep listening in order to get people to not feel the pressure of, as you say, transactional stuff. We talk about alchemy and gold. When you're at purpose and in flow, what are you absolutely happiest doing in what you're here to reveal to the world, like your purpose imperative?
I help them with what's called structural scalability. It's kind of like business engineering meets psychology. I help companies transform from the caterpillar of that stage 1 company to the butterfly of the stage 2 company, not making faster caterpillars. I'm not interested in that. I think we're both storytellers, and I think we both try to help people.
I think we have story and kindness in connection, and you genuinely help people as a great enabler. The story is the golden thread.
You're watching Just Press Record right here on Cultish Creative YouTube in collaboration with Epsilon Theory, and do check us out at Panoptica.ai. This is the show where I take two people from my network that I think just have to meet each other. I send them a blind request to show up with me live, and we just press record. So who's with me today? This first guest, he never, ever rests on his laurels. In fact, the only laurel he's ever rested on has been Stan Laurel. And that's a rest I will give a hearty endorsement to any day. Oh, the puns are coming. You might recognize him from, forgive the American translation of this, dumpster diving. The best kind. He's gifted at that, but he calls it being a sprotter or a skip diver. So park that in your garage, why don't you? Because I have a lot of questions about skip diving that we're going to have to get to at some point here. And if you ever thought prepping for a presentation required a mix of Shakespeare, Seinfeld, he's your guy every day of the week, guaranteed to make me realize I'm instantly dim-witted, and for the rest of you to gain instant wit. Host of the Good Listening To Show, acclaimed actor, voice actor, comedy improv specialist, executive coach, and communications trainer, Chris Grimes. Welcome to Just Press Record.
What an introduction. Get in.
Love that.
Chris.
It's just thumbs flying all over the emoji.
All the thumbs. I have somebody that interests you, and much like the way that Jared Dillian converted me to a cat psychic believer, this guest has convinced me that dog psychology works in the executive office. No comment on what my bosses have said when I've told them to heal, but he's on to something. So down boy now, Brad, don't get too excited about this. Known for putting some purpose in his planning, known for making scalability work infallibly by way of creative solutions for personal history pollutions, the guy family offices call when they need to keep it official, because no business is harder than family business at the end of the day, which I have learned so much from him and his work in that space. That's why I have to have him on. You might have heard of Fishers of Men, but today I bring you Fisher the Man, Brad Fisher.
Wow.
Welcome to Just Press Record.
Thank you.
More
Glad
thumbs
to be
up.
A long time coming, indeed, for both of you. Now, obviously, I've got you here. You're going to guess at the end why I wrote down that I had to introduce you. It's not the glasses. It's close.
It's the glasses, probably. That's your criteria.
And I had a joke about glasses this week. To the man who stole my glasses, I'm coming for you. I have contacts.
Chris, can you, like this, what did you call this? The skip diving, like skip diver, sprotter? What are these words?
Yeah,
what the hell
is a definition of a skip diver. And actually, that wasn't my handle. I've got a very previous guest called Chris Pirrie, who runs a company called Green Ginger, which is a world-renowned puppeteering company. And he is the arch sprotter. I learned the word sprot from him, which is this idea of just constantly diving into skips, which I think you dumpsters.
Yeah,
so
we all call
a
it
dumpster diver, which I quite like as well because of alliteration, dumpster diving or skip sprotting.
It feels very American.
I am not the sprotter, but I like a good sprot because it sounds appealing.
Fantastic.
I hate to admit this, but I don't know what you're talking about. So could someone define those a little bit in a little bit higher level?
Do us the honor, Chris, because I ran into this in one of your podcasts and I thought, this is such a freaking interesting concept.
Yeah, there's a chap who runs a very world-renowned theatre company, puppeteering company called Green Ginger. Yeah. And in a series of my shows where I was getting intrigued by a series strand called The Best of Bristol Voices. I'm based in Bristol in the United Kingdom. And this was a very old friend. I did my own creative endeavor in his studio once upon a time. I played a comic character called Stan Trolley, who was an extra. He was a washed up comedian in a large wheelie bin. And why he was in a wheelie bin is he could have been a comedy contender. He could have wheelie been somebody. But he would pop up like a sort of Jack in the Box. But anyway, in Chris Pirrie's studio, I sort of banked him as being someone that would be a good future guest. And he introduced me to a hobby of his, which is never being able to pass a dumpster or a skip, which is normally a skip's more when people are doing construction work and then they're emptying their house into the skip.
And
you can find a bit like Laurel and Hardy's gold in them thar hills. There's often gold in them thar skips. So he is and it's called, and he taught me this, it's called sprotting, which is the art of diving into a skip and retrieving the gold.
Okay. I think I have done that in my life. Not many times, but I have done that. Yes.
Not many times. But who amongst us has not explored?
This was my own dumpster because I threw something in it by mistake, but yeah.
Brad, what about you? The dog psychology. I feel like you want to explain to Chris your affinity for our canine friends.
I think I have no idea what you're talking about, Matt. I don't know anything about dog psychology. I've never used those two words in the same place.
Doss my research. I'll edit this part out if I have to. Did you do some work with an animal foundation or group? Is this maybe distant history or not history at all?
At one point years ago, I had a client that was a dog training company.
It's maybe what I'm thinking of.
Out on the web somewhere or something like that. Now we're getting down to it. Maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
I think there's something.
They trained their dogs to stand up on fire hydrants, like get up on the top of the fire hydrant. That was one of their signature moves that they would teach their dogs to do. But maybe that's what you're thinking of. Otherwise, I am a dog lover. I've had dogs my whole life, but I'm not a dog psychologist.
And a dog at a fire hydrant sounds a bit like an early warning, like a canary in a mine for a fire.
Yeah,
dog standing on the fire.
When the Dalmatian stands on the fire hydrant, stuff is really, really going down. Yeah, I had some weird note in one of my old notes from a prior conversation, and it must have been about the dog training client or something.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't figure out what you were talking about when you first mentioned it. I thought, okay, I'm just along for this ride. I'll just play that.
Listen, we're all just along for this ride at the end of the day. So, Brad, we're gonna play this magic game here. If you had to guess in a million years, from the Laurel Hardy jokes and the skiff diving, look at Chris and take a wild wrong guess on what you think Chris does.
Well, you mentioned coaching. So I'm wondering if there's something around that, or what does Chris do, or why are you connecting it? Is that
Let's guess, what does Chris do first? We'll get to why are we connecting at the end somewhere. What do you think Chris does? Wrong guess is welcome.
Well, you mentioned coaching, so I assume there's some of that in there. You mentioned comedy, and I wonder if there's not, and Chris, you've mentioned guests a couple times, so perhaps you have a podcast or some sort of show in the UK, I assume, and that's about as good as it's going to get, I think, right there.
All right, we're going to take that. And Chris, before you tell him, same question, like take some wild guesses at Brad. We've already established not the dog thing. I have errant notes, but I'm one step better than AI and hallucinations today on this Friday. So
just before I get into that, I love the fact that dogs are very good in terms of teaching us all presence, because they're very good at the clock of now, where they're going now.
That's right.
So I admire dogs greatly for that capacity. I love the cut of your jib in terms of your glasses, Brad. I also like the name Brad Fisher. And also you've got a very enigmatic bookcase behind you. So I'm going for intellectual. I'm thinking psychologist. I was given presumably the red herring of something to do with dog psychology, but that's not so much the case now. So I've been thrown off the scent. See what I did there?
I like that.
So I'm sniffing around somewhere else. But I think you help people in some regard with wisdom.
I try to help.
Yes, so you might be you might be a psychologist or a yes. I'm thinking coaching as well in part, or you train people on the sort of nuance of leadership, something like that.
I like the way this is. I like the way this is going, yeah. Chris. Give him like the couple sentence version of some of the things that Chris Grimes is up to.
I'm a motivational comedian, which is a handle or a moniker given to me during the pandemic, quite by happy accident. I was on a bike ride where my bike is my freedom. I love my bike. And I bumped into a friend I hadn't seen since before the zombie apocalypse, as I started to call the pandemic. And he was out on a bike ride with his son, who last time I'd seen his son was sort of yay high. But suddenly this 6'4" mountain of the sun was in the background, while the two dads exchanged, Chris exchanging, we've survived the zombie apocalypse stories. And then the son was classically impatient, as in, come on, Dad, because they thought they were out for a bike ride, while dads go, nee. Anyway, as they went to ride away, the son said, oh, come on, Dad. Anyway, who was that? And then the dad said, oh, that's Chris Grimes. And I was still within earshot, which is the weird bit. And then he said, so what does he do then? And then Ben said, what does he do? He's a motivational comedian. And then off they cycled. And ever since then, well, I stood there in that moment going, boom, I'll have that. Because in a way it sums up what I do, because my background is as a drama teacher, actor and comedy improvisation performer. And I use the transferable skills of being an actor, teacher, facilitator, coach, broadcaster, which is a big mouthful, but it's encapsulated in something in personal brand terms, which is one of the communication skills that I also train on. It's called an operator word. If you can say something that you do or about what you do with some sort of word or expression that causes a bit of a glitch in people's mainframe where they go, wait, what? Then you're onto something. So my wait, what is the fact that I'm a motivational comedian?
Awesome. I love that. And I'm sure we'll have no trouble finding topics to discuss today, but one of the best things I ever did 30 some years ago was take an improv class for a week in San Francisco, and it literally changed my life. So I thank you and your colleagues for that great gift.
And San Francisco was the sort of initial home front of comedy improvisation, wasn't it? I'm gathering. Wasn't that a second city? Is that San Francisco?
That was Chicago.
Okay. Yes. And
second city, Chicago, and that famous manual that's been updated a million times. That a second city.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brad, give him a taste. Give him the few sentence version or a small story about what you do.
Well, I have a story of someone describing what I do. When my son Tucker, who's now like the kid on the bike, much bigger than me, was in third grade, I think, something like that, 10 years old. Someone asked him at school, the teacher asked him, "What does your daddy do?" I think it was parent teacher night. "What does your daddy do?" And he said, "My daddy's an insultant." And I thought, I have never forgotten that. And I call myself an insultant to this day.
I love that.
I do work mostly with companies, with business owners, and I help them with what's called structural scalability. I work with mid-sized companies and help them get unstuck. I help them build structural scalability. It's kind of like business engineering meets psychology. And so I am a psychologist in some ways. I'm not trained that way, but I've had a lot of experience there. And the word insultant is very apt because people need people to tell them the truth. And, if you want to help yourself, you tell someone what they want to hear. And if you want to help them, you tell them what they need to hear. And so, yeah, I'm an insultant.
I love that.
Companies, and we have a process. And, someday I'll tell you all about it.
And of itself, that too is a great operator word because it causes a really happy glitch in people's mainframe because I have never heard that before. I love it.
What's the comedy story, Brad? What did you do in San Francisco? What's the story?
Well, I have a dear old friend named Shirzad Shamid. Actually wrote a really excellent book called Positive Intelligence. You might all want to read that. It's really great. But anyway, Shirzad told me one day, "You've got to take this improv class." I said, "What?" I'm a musician, so I've been on stages like you, Matt, up till then, all my life, but I had never been on a stage in an acting capacity. I was always in the pit orchestra. I was never on the stage. And I thought that was the most loathsome idea I had ever heard. And he said, "Trust me." And so I did. So I signed up for this thing and showed up. There were about 20 people, and they trained us as much as you can in 2 or 3 days how to do improv and all the techniques, yes, and supporting one another. And I could wax poetic about this, but it was very impactful for me. And it's back to the dogs, Chris. It taught me how to live and communicate in the moment in a very sharp way. And you've got to get out of your head or you can't do improv. And I'm sure I was crappy, just an amateur, but those skills, and then being able to take that into a sales call the next week or an investor meeting and be able to be out there, both the yes and, but mostly just not in your own headspace. It was life-changing. It really was.
And it's sometimes called getting the wedge out of your head when you explore spontaneity to get what your own self-blockers are, which is typically manifesting as no, but, no, but, no, but, as opposed to yes, and, yes, and, yes, and, yes, and.
I had the funniest metaphor. I don't know if it will go across the airwaves well, but I think, I used to look at it as if the eyes were in the back of my head looking out through my skull, to view the world. And I had to go all the way out through my head first. And once I learned how to apply this improv technique, it was more like one of those cartoons where your eyeballs are bulging out in front of your head. Can you visualize that?
Yeah.
And that's literally a metaphor that works for me. I don't have to go through my whole brain. I can just be right there, it's fun.
And with the comedy, it can sometimes be eyes on springs as well.
That's great. Yeah.
Chris, what is it about teaching stuff like this? Like teaching people to get the wedge out of their head, like you just said.
It's a reminder that we're far, far, far more spontaneous than we often give ourselves credit for, because life is one long improvisation, and yet people can feel very stuck when you're required or tasked with being spontaneous. But it's just the notion of keeping it, as I said, the clock of now that dogs occupy. And it's a really good way to, I suppose, pull apart the nature of presence, to explore it using this mindset of yes and.
Yeah, I love that.
How's that show up for you I'm curious in this connection between the improv class and the work when you're in front of clients, people. You're not in a comedy setting, Brad. When you're not in that comedy setting, like what tools do you use to help pull people into that presence and to like break out of the patterns like you are right here, right now? What tools do you use for that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for the one tool that is really great, and if there are any salespeople in the audience or any wannabe salespeople, I find that the simple best tool is to ask somebody to tell you their story. It's that simple. And I use those words. Please tell me your story. And the reason I think that is so powerful is that people are afraid in conversations when they're meeting a stranger or they're in a high stakes environment. They're afraid, they want to keep control. And when you start barraging people as a salesperson, let's say, with questions, what keeps you up at night? What are your inventory levels? Why do you do this? What do you, they feel a sense that they want to protect themselves. They want to put their armor on, even though you're trying to listen, you're asking questions. Salespeople and business people think that's all you need to do. But when you ask somebody to tell you their story, they get to retain control. They get to relax, and people love to talk. We all do. Look at me. I'm doing it right now. But they want to be able to tell it their way and have control. And it unlocks, and they'll tell you everything that they want to, they'll open up and they'll tell you everything you need to know to help them. And so the tool that I use, I hope in conjunction with that, is just being able to listen and not be worried about what I'm going to say next, but to really listen to what you're saying when you tell me your story.
What do you think about that, Chris? Asking somebody to tell me your story sounds a little bit like something I know you for.
It makes my heart sing hearing that reciprocated and played back. One of my main cuts and thrusts is literally the 3 words, "What's your story?" And I've even got a T-shirt with "What's your story?" And I recently exhibited for one of my storytelling structures within my show. You did ask if I had a podcast. I do. My podcast is called The Good Listening To Show. So called because my opinion about coaching, facilitating life, you get the best out of relationships by giving somebody a damn good listening to. So the quality of listening. And there's a series strand that's been there all along within the Good Listening To Show, but it's called Legacy Life Reflections, what's your story, which helps people. If I'm talking to somebody, it's either your story or the story of somebody near, dear, or close to you for posterity, lest we forget before it's too late. And it's because of this awareness, as you so beautifully put as well, that, for so many of us, our stories can stay locked in, untold, unheard, unloved. And so my passion for storytelling is to use the techniques of deep listening in order to get people to not feel the pressure of, as you say, transactional stuff, but go to, what's your story, using a storytelling framework.
Well, I love that. It's funny, Matt brought us together because of our glasses, but we have this storytelling in common. Maybe, that's interesting.
Chris,
there was an NPR show. It was so sad that they stopped doing it, but it was called StoryCorps. Does that ring a bell with you? Do you remember National Public Radio in the U.S.? And they had booths set up, recording booths around the country. There was one in Grand Central Station in New York. That's where we lived at the time. And people would come in and just talk to one another. So a mother and a daughter, or 2 old friends from high school that are 80 years old now, or sometimes it was a criminal and their victim, and they would just communicate and tell their story. It was the most beautiful. Every Friday morning for like 10 minutes, it would be there, and for 20 years, and it disappeared, but it was wonderful. Do you remember that, Matt?
I do remember that because I was fascinated by it and, raised on
Tell me
those
the name
shows.
again. StoryCorps, did you say?
Yeah, like Corps, C-O-R-P-S, StoryCorps.
Yes, I was going for core as in of an apple, so StoryCorps.
Right.
Yes.
Core as in French, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Well, we need some French derivations here. Chris, the legacy life reflections bit, what's that about?
It's a natural evolution of me having started helping people to tell humanity stories, one story at a time. And then what I struck upon was using my father as a very willing guinea pig as my first ever legacy life reflections experiment, if you like. And I recorded my father in the halcyon days of his 80s. He died a year ago, but I recorded him 5 years ago. And now my father, he knew exactly what I was up to, but there's no sort of morbid intention in what I'm doing. But now that I still have his recording, his film, his podcast, I don't need to tell the audience how precious that obviously is, because I've managed to capture a story before it was too late. But again, there's no morbid intention, because we could tell our story now and, return to an energetic space that I set my podcast in. And Matt has guested as well. It has the same structure, but I can take a sort of slightly deeper dive into whatever's most helpful to the guest. So obviously legacy is about a bit more of an existential cut and thrust. And just in the last week, I was incredibly privileged to be entrusted with an extraordinarily wise woman who had been gifted an episode by her son. And she's recently had a very testing terminal cancer diagnosis. So the show wasn't about that, but that was very much in the backdrop. But she was an extraordinary woman, sharing immense pragmatism, stoicism, wisdom. And normally legacy life reflections, as I am experiencing them, are private for distribution for your nearest, dearest friends and family. But there is also the option to go public and be global with it. And I'm just waiting to hear. I'm encouraging her to go public with it, because I think others would take great succor from the wisdom that she shared.
Oh, that's great.
Brad, you got to have some questions about this. And it's interesting because when you brought up the StoryCorps thing, I hadn't really connected that in my brain clearly before, but it's a perfect callback for some of the work Chris is doing. Any questions about like what he's just described as an actual business concept practice that he spends time with during his day?
Well, you made the comment, or you said that her son gifted that, and that made me wonder, what the heck did that mean? But then as you went on, Chris, it's clear that that you produce these things privately for people, and they pay for that. And then they have a recording for posterity. And then you have a podcast where people come on and you have conversations. And then there seems to be maybe a hybrid where they make their legacy recording public in some way. Is that right?
Yes, lovely question. Within the construct of the show, there is a curated list where I chase people that I really want to have in the show. And I call that a sort of, and Matt was exactly one of those. I was introduced to him by somebody else who was absolutely fantastic, whose name's suddenly gone out of my head, Julia Duthie. Who's got a wonderful podcast called People Are Everything. And she passed the golden baton, which is a construct within what I'm doing within my show. So Matt would fit into something called my curated list. And then that sort of adds grist to the mill of the sort of value proposition. And then I have a number of different series strands using the same storytelling structure, which I've carefully curated and honed. So one could be Legacy Life Reflections, which I've just described. But the other one is called Brand, Strand and Founder Stories, which helps businesses tell a less dull, less transactional, warmer, more connecting human story. And then another one might be Leadership Reflections. So my structure, rather than having painted myself into a corner on, for example, this is a podcast about leadership. So leadership, I've got something that's a bit more juicy than that. And it allows me to take a helicopter landing in my structure, which allows me to help guests differently with what it is they want to promote and amplify or talk about.
Wow. I do have questions for you. It's so cool. I'd love to learn more about the framework and also the word legacy itself. But first the frame, so many years ago, I don't know, 30 years ago, something like that, I read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, that Joseph Campbell. And the hero's journey. And that opened up a whole universe, of course. And then 25 years later or whatever, there's this marketing book. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called Building a Story Brand, from this guy named Donald Miller. And it is a very clean, simple, but brilliant book about how to consider your and understand how to tell the stories of your customer, which is it's a game changer for people in business. And I had a lot of my clients read that book. And I don't know, I just love the notion, and I've done a fairly deep dive on how to build a story, how to write a novel, how to look at somebody's inner motivation and their outer motivation and the different character. I don't know if you want to riff on that a little bit. I'd love to hear your take on what your story framework is.
I'd be delighted to tell you, and also coming back to something you so beautifully articulated, which is the genesis of it all, is tell me your story. So in the same way that you use that sentence, my what's your story is exactly the same intention.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to sort of put a bit of a fish hook in the water, my structure involves a clearing, a tree, a lovely juicy storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's some alchemy, some gold, a couple of random squirrels, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, a golden baton, and a cake.
Yikes.
So the clearing is your serious, happy place. Every guest answers this differently, but my question that is the first bit of preparation for my future guests is, would you say your serious, happy place is? Where do you go to get clutter-free, inspirational, and able to think? That's your clearing. Once you've arrived within the clearing, very deliberately, existentially, and a bit Samuel Beckett-y, I then arrive with a tree, and then I shake your tree to see which storytelling apples fall out. And then there's a lovely, juicy storytelling exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which, by the way, I discovered as a leadership exercise as a really brilliant way to accelerate group cohesion and deepen trust really quickly.
Is
5,
like
4, 3, 2, 1. It's 5 minutes to have thought about. In other words, don't overthink it. We talked about spontaneity. Yes, and keep spontaneous. Don't overthink it. 5 minutes to have thought about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that never fail to grab your attention. And I mentioned squirrels, borrowed from the film Up, where the dog goes, oh, squirrels. We've all got our shiny object syndrome, or our squirrels of distraction, our monsters of distraction. So the 2 is, what never fails to stop you in your tracks and distract you in your no doubt hectic, eclectic and manic lifestyle. And then the 1 is a quirky or unusual fact about you we couldn't possibly know about you until you tell us. I'm nearly there. Then we stay in the clearing, move away from the tree. Next, we talk about alchemy and gold. When you're at purpose and in flow, what are you absolutely happiest doing in what you're here to reveal to the world, like your purpose imperative? And then finally, I award my guests with a cake. And that's a metaphor where you get to put a cherry on the cake after we've talked about cake and whether you like it or don't like it. And if you don't, you're quite strange. And the cherry on the cake is stuff like, what's a favorite inspirational quote that's always given you succor and pulled you towards your future? With the gift of hindsight, what notes, help or advice might you proffer to a younger version of yourself? And then now, finally, we're ramping up to talk about Shakespeare, borrow from the 7 Ages of Man speech, all the world's a stage with all the men and women merely players, to talk about legacy and how you'd most like to be remembered. And just before we get there, the penultimate moment is pass the golden baton, please, which is an invitation for my guests, having experienced this from within, to now keep the golden thread of the storytelling going by passing the golden baton along to somebody else in their life, network, friendship group, whoever, who they know would really, really enjoy being given a damn good listening to in this way.
Wow.
So thank you for letting me tell you that.
Thank you for telling us.
I feel obligated to translate this part to Brad because I want Brad's reaction to this. So he gives that list and it feels overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Like something in your brain is like, that is a lot of checkpoints. That feels just like how I can't remember half of what he just said when he's going through this. But then he does this thing where he takes you at each layer and he takes you through all those layers. And in the end, you step back and you go, oh my God, I see how this all fits together.
There's a through line. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You've thought a lot about this, and it's in the story brand stuff. If it's in the work that you've built for the client, the way you take people through, or how do you take that overwhelming list of all the stuff that you know are those key integral parts and get people to feel safe to start, but then also to step back and see that through line? How do you think about that with your work, Brad?
I have to ponder that for a second. So like you, Chris, I have a framework that I work with. So we do eventually get to the framework, but I start in a more free-form way with that question of tell me your story. And every time I have a coaching session or a meeting with a leadership team or, with a client, I try to do that with other people as well. I like to find a miniature version of that and really essentially ask, what's the most important thing for us to talk about today? What's on your mind? What have you been thinking about since we last met? I know that sounds very simplistic, but if you get in the habit of doing that and then just shut up and listen, then the essential bits will come out. They will rise above the surface and you can connect the dots and have a conversation. So I'll have an agenda in a lot of conversations that I have. But it's got to be fluid. And if you start by really listening and asking an open-ended, kind of provocative, simple, in control question, control for them, then the conversation can evolve. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Matt, exactly, but that's how I try to approach it. And then, I can tell you all about my framework and the different elements that we work with. And so you want to bring those in, but you want to do it in an appropriate way.
And may I just say as well, I love the beauty and the simplicity of the quick golden question to get people on the open road of intention setting when you're coaching through silence initially and listening. And just to be clear, I was describing my podcast structure there, not how I don't always use that framework when I'm coaching somebody. That's
Right.
my storyscape.
Right. I understood that. Yeah.
And I would love to hear about your framework, as you mentioned as well.
Take it away, Brad. Tell them about your framework. I think what's brilliant inside of this, and this is what I wanted you both to hit to this point where you're sharing this, because you have this lattice work, these structures in your brain that you're both experts at helping. You're like, I have this here and I am so comfortable with it that I will take your freeform thing and just start piecing it together while you talk. And you think you're just talking about yourself, but I'm hanging it all on these little pieces of lattice work behind the scenes. So yeah, Brad, I would love if you tell Chris a little bit about your process and what you do.
So I work with companies and business owners and CEOs and their leadership teams. And we have a process. As I mentioned, we refer to it as structural scalability. There's a concept within that. It's actually the start of the show, really. It's called the second leap. So you could argue that my work is helping people take the second leap. I'll explain what that is. So when you started your business, both of you are entrepreneurs. You have podcasts, you have coaching business, you have an enterprise that's Chris Grimes or Matt Zeigler. And when you started that, you took the first leap. Now, sometimes it's somebody is joining a company that's been in business for a long time, or I work with a lot of families where dad's 84 years old. He started the company 30 years ago, and now his daughter's going to come and be the new CEO. So she's taking the first leap to join the company. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when somebody starts a company like that, they do it in the form of what's called a stage one company. And I'll ask you, you'll get this right away. Have you ever watched 6-year-olds play soccer?
Football. I'm adjusting for Chris. Just in
football. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It's like iron shavings following a magnet, right? They just chase after the ball and they work and a lot of energy, but they don't get a lot of effectiveness. And there's two positions, one goalie in each team, and probably they're standing there picking their nose in the, like I used to back when I played soccer or football. But anyway, nobody is playing positions, and companies, stage one companies are like that. The founder starts a business and she needs people to do what she says. She makes all the decisions. They stand around waiting for her to decide things and ask her to do things, and they want to make sure she's happy. And they follow her around like a little soccer ball, which works really well until it doesn't. And people hit the wall, they get exhausted, they get frustrated. Sometimes they have financial troubles because they get stuck. And you used that word a while ago, Chris, get stuck. And so the second leap is often harder for people than the first leap, but it's realizing that your job as a CEO is not to run the company. It's to build a leadership team that can run the company, and you lead the leadership team. It's a completely different mindset and a completely different structure. And so that's the underpinning of what I do. I help companies transform from the caterpillar of that stage 1 company to the butterfly of the stage 2 company, not making faster caterpillars. I'm not interested in that. and to do that, I'll say we take something infinitely complex, which is a business. It's a human system, psychological systems and physical systems, et cetera. And I compare it to a human body. We have 602 muscles in our body. We have hundreds of miles of blood vessels. We have billions of neurons, hundreds of billions. We have literally trillions with a T of cells in our body. There's nothing more complex. So what do? Medical science, we categorize and we simplify and we find the through line that you mentioned. And I'll use the muscle groups as an example. We have 602 muscles, and they're basically cut into 6 groups: your back, your chest, your shoulders, your arms, your legs, and your abs. Well, a business has 6 muscle groups too. And that's what we call the 6 scalabilities. And I'll stop. I know I'm talking too much now, but it's a leadership and culture is number 1. And number 2 is the growth engine, which combines your branding and marketing and sales and customer support. 3 is the money side. The accounting process is reporting. 4 is your team structure and alignment and recruiting, et cetera. 5 is technology and infrastructure. And 6 is operations and work processes and innovation. And we look at each one of those, and we've got tools and factors that I know this is probably boring for a lot of people, so I'll stop there, but that's our framework. And it really it eliminates all the dark corners, and it enables people to transform their businesses and their lives. It really makes a difference.
That was very, very illuminating. I really enjoyed that. And particularly we don't make faster caterpillars. I love that. Also, relatively, your second leap is so resonant because I think of something called a second curve. So my training and development company is called Second Curve. Obviously, you will know this, but it's because we're all on a curve or a trajectory. But as your curve begins to wane, what do you do to attach to your second curve that's going to pull you toward your future?
Right. Oh, I love that. I had a client once. I was just talking about that this morning. What a coincidence. He was 87 years old. And he kept saying, if I die. And I'm like, dude, you were like 20 years past your expiration day. Wouldn't you? And people don't want to deal with those thoughts and those questions.
Well, we're all going to live together is the factory default setting we all have. So.
Right.
Yes.
What do you think about the story of that transition? Second curve for you, Chris? Because it changes the way we tell a story in who we are before and who we are after, and helping people just see that second curve even exists.
Well, it's a sigmoid curve in that it's, I'm not very mathematical, but I've been told it's a sigmoid curve. So you've got to get going on your second curve whilst things are still humming along nicely, because the unemotional intelligent thing to do is for your curve to wane, for life to just be a bit shit for a long time, and then you do something about it. But it's much better that you get going energetically with, okay, what next? Linked to that lovely leadership quote, what's got you here won't get you there. And of course, profoundly, life isn't just 2 curves. It's many, 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 many curves within curves within curves. But it's really interesting. And what I love about describing a second curve similarly, when I'm talking to leadership groups, is that if you're in a new job, you'll feel like you're bouldering around to even get on a curve in the first place. But then every now and again, you will feel on fire, and you'll be on the crest of a wave of everything humming along beautifully, exactly as it should. But then more often than not, when you are brought in to help teams, groups become, what's next for their second leap or their second curve or what's next, everything's got a bit meh, and there are new choices that could be made to help them go to where next.
Yes. And each one of those takes courage. It's hard.
Oh,
and it's like
yes.
stepping off a cliff on a dark night. You just don't know what exactly is down there, but you just got to do it.
How hard is that, Brad, when you're working with clients or you're working with people and just all those different phases of the curve that Chris described? Because you see all the ups and downs. You actually experience this right alongside people all the time.
There's, as usual, there's a very broad range. Some people are open to this and to change, and they listen and they think about it. And some people are terrified, and it's very, very difficult. Some people think they have all the answers. Some people realize that their role is to ask the question. So it's not, it's actually, what I would say though, is it's much easier than you think. And if you approach it right with the right baby steps, then you find yourself a couple of weeks down the road realizing that you've already changed, and it sort of just happened. And especially in my setting with leadership teams, they're eager to step up and play a new role and not be women and men anymore. And so actually happens in a very natural way. And it's more of a revealing something that's already there than it is creating something new, I think.
Which links, I find, to encouraging people to discover their own inner genius, the version of you that's in flow, that knows exactly what to do in order to bring about change.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's an aversion, obviously, often to change, because there's that comedy quote that the only human beings that actively look forward to change are wet babies. The rest of us find it much more difficult. So,
what?
If Brad, thinking about, and Chris, I'm not going to be asking you this to reveal any personal details about the way that actually works, but if you take the whole scalability framework and you think about your knowledge in helping people grow things up to that second level and to take those second leaps, with what little you know so far about Chris's business, what's the way you would start to ask him questions to understand what's going on there and how he could scale, grow, expand that footprint?
Well, we actually do have a process. We call it a scalability roadmap, and it's a series of meetings that go into each of the six scalabilities in turn. And we start by really understanding what you want from your business. And so the way I would start the conversation with Chris is, a friend of mine taught me a concept called the Island A and Island B. So you're sitting today on Island A, Chris, and it's a beautiful island and nice sandy beach on a warm, day, and you got good sunscreen and all that, and your life is pretty good. And I can tell your life is pretty good. Nice glasses, handsome man, you got things. And you look across about 2.5, 3 miles across the bay, there's another island, Island B. And that island is even better than Island A. I don't know why or what it is, but you've got to figure out why and what your Island B would be inside of this nice life you have. Now, this happens to me all the time. We got $100 million company. Somebody's got a huge bank account, blah, 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 but they're miserable. They've got everything that society thinks they want, and they're not happy. They're sitting on Island A and they're looking over there. They've never thought about what Island B is, but you need to define what Island B is. And then we have to figure out, do you have to swim across? Do we have a speedboat? Do you want, to get to Island B, let's build a little plan. So we would start by really looking at what you want out of your business. The business that you have is there to serve you. And one of the things I have found is that people tend to feel obligated to serve their business. They flip it over, especially in family business, because grandpa started it, and I certainly don't want to let it dwindle on my watch. And so they end up they should be in a happy place, but they're in a miserable place. And so we find out about Island B, and then we help them realize that their people can do most of the work and they can focus on what's important. Again, I don't want to go too much into the detail. I'm glad to as much as you want, but that's how we would start. Where do you want to be with your business? And then who's there to help you? There's another wonderful book called Who Not How. Benjamin Hardy is the author. Fantastic. And, I realized reading that most of us, certainly the three of us, are probably most of the people that are interested in this podcast, are successful in life because when we encounter a problem, we ask ourselves, how am I going to solve this problem? And we do that for enough years that people give us a promotion or buy our stuff or whatever, and we succeed. But what you need to learn how to do, and the second leap does this, is you've got to learn to say, who's going to solve this for me, not how am I going to solve it? And that will set you free. And enough said. Those are some of the things I would talk to you about, Chris.
So Chris, I'm basically roping Brad into free advice to the degree you need or want any. But it's interesting to think about like where you are in this growth curve. And I'm gonna focus on the podcast just for a second. It's been 5 years. 5 years of doing the show at this point.
5 years and about 270 episodes in now.
5 years of doing the show. We're going to put a little sparkle on the top of that too. You do the show. You've already explained the different layers. There's a private version of the show you'll do for no audience. There's the curated version of the show you'll do for an audience. You found a home in almost a version of national public radio. You get some boosted distribution, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Tell Brad what that is.
Two things. There's something new happening, but it's also the first early breakthrough was it got pulled or invited to be pulled into. The same content occupies. Do you know the show Desert Island Discs in the UK? Is that a familiar story format to you?
You'll know the format as soon as he says it to you.
It's a Radio 4, very, very famous, very long established radio show, which invites quite famous people normally onto a desert island where they turn up with their 10 favorite records. They get given a complete works of Shakespeare and another luxury item of choice. So my format that I described is resonant with, but it's not the same as, and it's a bit like a sort of glow up version, if you like, without needing to compete against it, because there's no such thing as an original idea. We all know that it's in the packaging, in the repurposing. And anyway, my show enjoys sort of Desert Island Disc-esque status in a show called UK Health Radio, or rather an internet radio entity called UK Health Radio, which gives me this extraordinary gift, I suppose, of international distribution, because it broadcasts to 54 countries with apparently 1.4 million listeners across the network. So it's quite a good exposure. And then recently there's been an entity called Brushwood Media, which is an American-based entity who are very attached or close to Apple, I'm gathering. I'm beginning to learn about them. And they're just beginning to talk to me about how they're very, very interested in me introducing my show to their network and audience too. And it's a live theatre show. And just today, I've just agreed that I'm going to be doing live. It's called Still the Good Listening To Show, but live, where it works really, really well in front of a live invited audience. And I've had some quite famous people come and sit there because it's just a really, tried and tested, lovely entertainment for people to observe the people going through the various gateposts of or storytelling signposts of the journey. So it's at this sort of tipping point where there's becoming, greater interest, and I'm loving doing it. And in terms of my own second curve, my absolute dream with it is to become more of a professional broadcaster. And I would love to just be a digital nomad where I can plug myself into the internet wherever I want in the world. And then very modestly, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, somebody comes into my show. I give them a good listening to. They genuinely feel helped by it. I love doing it. Everyone's a winner, chicken dinner. And off we go to the guest.
When you hear all that, Brad, so like obviously there's only one Chris. You can only be so many places at once. But how do you think about stitching all those different pieces together? Where's your consultant brain go with like, here's ways you would help him approach a problem like that, of trying to get to that point of where he gets to be the digital nomad and gets to be the broadcast personality at the level he wants to, knowing the momentum and the trajectory he's currently on?
Well, first of all, you mentioned, Chris, at the very beginning, finding your flow state or helping people find their flow state. And I think we talk about the through line. We've brushed on this concept a lot, which is, what is your highest and best use? What makes this special? And how are you going to propel yourself to island B, that using that metaphor. And So I would start, I guess, by doing some soul searching. I'm sure you probably have. I'm pretty just going to nod your head, but there are things that you probably started out doing that you don't do anymore, or you shouldn't do anymore. For example, your bookkeeping and your accounting and responding to messages and selling, getting yourself booked on all these things, buying your plane tickets, all of this stuff that could take your time that you could be devoted towards really, I don't know what it is, if it's creating content or if it's finding guests or, bringing, massaging ideas to make them your own. I don't know, but that, you've got to find that and you've got to find that magic. And so many of us get stuck in the day-to-day work because it's convenient and it's comfortable and it feels like we're making progress and it enables us to avoid the hard pain of creation. That's really hard work. I don't know. That's pretty obvious statement, I guess. I don't know how else to approach it though.
You're fielding some very high pressure questions, Brad. I'm very impressed because you've been tasked with giving, consultancy advice on a very high level, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you.
Are you building out the team around you with this? And Brad's good for high pressure. That's part of why he's here today. I know this of his character.
Your description of getting help to do the stuff that gets me away from being caught in the weeds, as I've also heard it described. I'm on the path of that. So some of what you described, I've definitely achieved in terms of bookkeeping. Someone edits my podcast for me now. But there's a lot more that could be done in terms of automation. My wife very kindly, as a sort of 50% stakeholder in what we do, she happily, books my transport for me if I need her to. But I'm very much a sort of charismatically led business. I am my brand. And to your very astute question, Matt, about there's only one Chris Grimes, what advice would you give him? So scalability is a slight challenge, shall we say? Mm-hmm. But I've got lots of energy for particularly the broadcast possibilities. I'm not so enamored. I love doing facilitation, coaching and training, but that used to be me traveling 4 or 5 days a week on the speaker circuit or, running training programs. I'm wanting to slow down a bit more to actually have more of a sort of broadcasting entity hub to what I'm doing. So that's Island B is slowing down, but also warming up and glowing up with what's really a bit of a soul chime for me.
I would love to build on that. Could I build on that for a moment?
Of course.
Is that okay now?
Run with
and Chris, I think that two things come to my mind there. One is, especially in the US, I understand, I don't know what it's like in the UK and Europe, but the continent, I mean, but we tend to keep ourselves so busy and we feel uncomfortable. It's like uncomfortable silence, uncomfortable non-busyness, and we're addicted to busyness. And I think, I encourage people to really look at what they do on a day-to-day basis, really dig in, and you can get rid of about 40% of the crap you do without even changing your business model, and get rid of that addiction. And the first cousin corollary to that is the idea of self-compassion. We're so hard on ourselves, and if you met somebody on a street corner and they ended up, you had a little conversation and you found out they have exactly the same opinions that you do. They like the same things that you do. They dislike the same things. They are afraid of the same things and they're attracted to the same things. You would find that person, you would take care of them, you would nurture them, you would have their back, you would compliment them even if they had a bad haircut. But we have ourselves, we look in the mirror and we put so much pressure and we're so hard on ourselves and we end up going down these career and business like rabbit holes rather than taking care of ourselves like we would take care of our kids or our spouse or our friends. And that's a big lesson that I was probably in my late 50s before I started learning the answer to that one, but that's kind of what we talked about too. But you seem like a person who gets that, Chris. So, you're probably ahead of me on that, but
I'm intrigued to know, if I may ask, how old you are as well, because I feel we're similar ages, but I'm not sure. but that could be too rude a question.
No, I'm 65. I turned 65 in August. How about you?
I'm 63, and yes, I'm glad that ended up being a compliment to you. I love that.
You seem way younger than me now. You're right. Okay.
And you have a flavor of Robert Redford about you, just facially. I'm just that's a compliment as well.
Wow. Wow. Well, Sundance Brad over here.
So yes, exactly that.
I live in Salt Lake City. I haven't met Robert Redford once, but anyway.
Yes. And very sadly no longer with us. He's one of the great losses to the universe in the last few months.
Yeah, he's a very good man, for sure.
Chris, does that part just speak to you? I'm just curious with the, I feel like what you described in setting aside more of the consulting work in favor of more of the, like, that's the part where you're in transit too.
Yes, going where your soul chimes is easier said than done. But well, actually, it's important that you get a sort of some energetic buzz in happiness, I suppose, in knowing that you're doing something that helps people and is fun to do as well. So there's a reciprocity inherent in helping people tell their stories in a way that can set them free. And you talked about that so eloquently, Brad, in terms of, mining into people's stories when you first work with them as an enabler or a facilitator to them. So again, that's very resonant. You can tell how very monumentally present as a coach and mentor you would be or are.
I feel that resonance with you. This is a fun conversation.
So I made a bunch of notes, and I've got some very, I think, pointed questions inside of this that I want to get your reflections on from this conversation. And I'm jumping right to what you were just saying, Chris. And Brad, how do you think about this? Basically, like building a story from the ground up versus extracting a story from somebody. Are those totally different things in your mind, or are they totally related things in your mind? Building a story versus extracting a story.
Building a story's... Sorry.
Go ahead. No, please, go ahead.
You made me think of the writer's pressure of an empty page, but an empty space brimming and charged with potential is exactly what comedy improvisation is about. Yes, and yes, and yes, and. So they're both conduits to effective story curation, I think. And my first ever theatre book was Peter Brook's The Empty Space. Again, this idea that it's an empty space brimming and charged with potential again. That's what I think of as being energetically the clearing that I find myself in. So having nothing to work with is still something, but I quite like curating stories when they're already on the path of, because of the acknowledgement of, look how far you've come in helping people get to where next. Mm-hmm. So I saw them as they're opposites, but they're good places to go to invent or create. I think creativity can reside in the known and then in the unknown.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I love that.
What do you think?
I'm going to take the contrary. I'm going to like to answer that question. I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian approach and say, writing a story, creating a story, I'm hungry to do that. That's one of my next curves, and I'm already working on that, and I've read a lot about it, and I've got a bunch of half-written books. But the contrarian place I'm going to go is that when you're listening to someone's story, the natural human tendency is to try to connect the dots and create a narrative of your own. And that's most of the time is bad. You're going to misunderstand who they are, and you're not going to really hear them. You're just going to be drawing your own conclusions and then behaving based on those. So I think the idea the way I would answer your question, Matt, when there's another person involved, is you don't create the story. You try to listen, you try to draw the story, you try to discern what the story is. It's not your story, it's their story. And if you try to make it yours and then you do pattern recognition, and pretty soon you're off in left field and they're no longer with you. So that's how I would look at that.
I actually really, really love that. In part because it recognizes what story is yours to tell versus which is theirs. And Chris, it's that part of listening, and this is, I think, part of what you explained with curation too, where it's you help draw it all out onto the page, and then you step back again for them to connect dots.
Yes, there's something it's beautiful, the idea of, you know, the deep listening where you step across the line and listen to them. You lose your own narrative, you leave your own baggage narrative behind, and when you step into the empty space or the clearing where anything is possible, it's about them.
Brad, I have to know, my son
and
his girlfriend are visiting us they live in San Francisco and we live in Utah. And last night my son was yelling at me because I don't listen to him, and I do connect the dots, and I tell him rather than hear me. So do not, do as I say, not as I do, please.
Do you know what? Our family are our harshest critics. My family are always teasing me by saying, "Good listening. How did you do that? You're deaf."
Well, in the nature of good listening and deaf, Chris, Brad described himself as an insultant.
I love that. Yes.
Which is, what do you think now that you've gotten to spend some time with Brad? What do you think about his title as insultant? Give me some pros and cons to this framing for him.
I think he is au contraire to insultant. He's charm personified, and I love the hook of an insultant because of the story that your son, or the 5-year-old was your son who said that. Is that right? Right. I got the time frame right. So I love it because it's that sort of glitch in the universe that only children can give us. So I think it's a beautifully ironic, very clever operator word for you, but you're far from an insultant. You are the great complimenter and the great enabler, I would say.
Oh, thank you.
Same, opposite direction, Brad. He describes himself as motivational comedian. Help me rank some pros and cons for motivational comedian for Chris Grimes.
Well, I'm sure this is not exactly the way that phrase was intended or that you use it, but I think a lot of comedians and a lot of people use humor. One lesson that I've learned is don't make jokes with people because it hurts their feelings, Even if you're making a nice joke, even if it's a good friend, you say, you're late again, Matt, whatever. It hurts. And you seem to be a very positive person that uses humor and finds those little glitches in the fabric that are funny. But I get the sense that you don't use humor in a mean way, or, you don't victimize other people with your humor, even, anyway, that maybe I'm just kind of returning the compliment that you gave me, but I mean it with sincerity. I get that vibe from you. And that's wonderful to bring humanistic humor into the world. It's a beautiful thing.
And thank you for that sincerely too. Sorry, before you said anything, Matt, I wanted to say that's why Stan Laurel is my all-time comic hero, because it's about kindness, humility, simplicity, slight haplessness. And he has become a bit of a style guide always in my life, Stan Laurel.
Wow.
And my son is called Stan because I've always wanted a son called Stan.
Cool. Good for you.
We're going to play the game. Actually, before the game, you have any good Robert Redford movie tips? Favorite Robert Redford movie? Either you got a good...
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is the just all-time favorite.
You have one, Brad?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, but we watched The Horse Whisperer a couple of days after he died. And I saw that when it came out the first time back in the last century, And it was actually really fun. And he directed that movie too. And it meant a lot to see that after he, passed. So that's one I would recommend.
I got to go back and rewatch that one. I don't think I've seen that in a long, long time. I'm going with The Sting, though. Who else is in that?
You won't believe it.
Scarlett
Johansson.
How old is she in it?
She was 13 years old or 12 years old. Or that was, I think, certainly her breakout movie, but it was probably maybe her first movie. And she was wonderful. I think she was nominated for an Academy Award for that.
I guess that was the start of something amazing for her.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to play the game. Wrong answer is welcome. You're going to try to guess why I thought you two had to meet. I wrote this down before we talked, so we're all going to be, you have better odds of being right than I do on this one. Brad, why do you think I wanted to introduce you to Chris Grimes?
Well, I think we're both storytellers, and I think we both try to help people. And I think we're obvious, we have the coaching in common. So it's probably, in addition to the glasses, it's in that soup somewhere. I would
Chris, same question. Why do you think I thought it was so important?
It's in the soup somewhere. In the soup somewhere. I love that.
Yeah, borrow that one.
I thought I just want to mirror what you just said, because I feel the same thing. I think we have story and kindness in connection, and you genuinely help people as a great enabler. And so it's the story is the golden thread, I think. And the fact that you want to be a writer and where you're going next makes complete sense as well, in terms of your own second leap or second curve. But you've been doing it all along. Sometimes what you do next has been right in front of you all along.
Mm-hmm.
Ain't it the truth? All right, I'm feeling way better about my answer, guys. This is great.
Okay,
I wrote it's stories with heart and soul all the way down.
That makes me feel good. Thank you.
I truly think that's what you both embody in different ways, in the way that you genuinely listen to people and get those stories out of them, and then you don't try to impose, like, oh, clearly you're going the Darth Vader route, and you really need to go the Luke route. You're not doing that thing to them.
What did you say? I missed that. I'm sorry. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Clever. In the name of comedy. Brad Fisher, if people want to find you on the internet, they want to learn more about you, where should they look you up and bug you these days?
Well, my company is called the Scalable Leadership Group, and my website is scalableleadership.com, and my email address is brad, B-R-A-D, at scalableleadership.com. And that would be fun. I'd love to meet people.
Pretty easy. Look Brad up. This is the kind of listening you get with Brad. Chris, same question. People want to bug you on the internet. Where should they find you?
You can look at thegoodlisteningtoshow.com, which is the mothership of my broadcasting enterprise. And then legacylifereflections.com was there all along, but just this last year, I was advised very helpfully to dig that golden nugget up from them thy hills and put it on its own plinth. So Legacy Life Reflections is a particularly precious series strand of the Good Listening To Show because of the storytelling of those that are precious, near or dear to us, with my own father, Colin Grimes. There's a beautiful photograph of my dad in his happy place, which happened to be on this occasion, on this photograph, where he's sort of going cheers to a good life with a bottle of a glass of champagne, toasting my mum in Madeira, where they went every year for 30 years at Christmas and New Year. So on the legacylifereflections.com website, you'll see my dad being the sort of happy mascot. And then secondcurve.uk is my training and development company. And my email address is chris@secondcurve.uk.
I want to encourage everybody listening to check those out. I'll put all the information in the comments. If you want to hear some people get into the act of listening and how it's done right, you want to see Chris's podcast. If you need services for your business, you want to reach out to somebody like Brad. This is the Cultish Creative YouTube channel. I'm Matt Zeigler. Thanks for joining me today, guys. We are out.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks to you, Matt, as well. What a great construct Just Record is. Just press record. That was just lovely and every bit as wonderful as I hoped it might be.
It was fun.
Thank you both.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below to Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Zeigler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast It may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultishcreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.